Hey everyone, welcome back to Brewbound Frontlines, our weekly live stream check-in with beer industry leaders on the moves they're making in this fast-changing business climate amid the COVID-19 pandemic. I am Justin Kindle, the editor of Brewbound, and I am joined, as always, on this socially distant social hour by my colleague, Jess Infante, who happens to be in her happy place in New Jersey. Jess, let's get this out of the way. What the hell is that behind you?
So my mom loves pineapples. They're like a symbol of hospitality and somehow connected to sea captains. So she's created this pineapple wall. It makes it really easy to get her different gifts because she's pretty easy to shop for. Some of these she's made herself out of sea glass. I don't know if you can tell that, but my mom has been probably our most loyal watcher since we started this. And she's currently like not sure what to do because she's just watching me talk and she can't see the rest of you guys. So
that beats
anyway.
An echo. And I think you're one step closer to somebody rating your view.
Oh, I welcome the Rate My Sky room people. I also think this now makes me the favorite child.
Anything to make you the favorite child is what we're here for. But what we're actually here for today is we're bringing together a pair of legal experts as well as an advocate for responsible nightlife ventures to discuss the various laws and regulations that we've seen loosened during this pandemic, the odds those changes can be made permanent, the Main Street to Bourbon Street phenomenon that we're seeing in states such as Michigan, and much more. Joining us today to discuss are Nicole Shustak, counsel for McDermott, Will & Emery. Thanks for being here, Nicole.
Thanks for having me, Justin and Jess.
We are thrilled to have you. We're also thrilled to have Shauna Barnes, a partner with Kaleo Legal. Thanks for being here, Shauna.
Thank you so much for having me. Pumped to be here.
And our final guest this week is Jim Peters, the Executive Director for the Responsible Hospitality Institute. Thanks for being here, Jim. You come highly recommended by Lester Jones of the NBWA.
Well, it's great to be here. And just as a side note, pineapple is the symbol of hospitality. So I think your home there is obviously overcompensating for hospitality in a big way.
Definitely is.
We need to transport that wall to your house, Jim. Get you a similar one. Jess and I are super appreciative for all of you being here today. To our viewers out there, if you have a question for one of or all of our panelists, shoot us a text at 617-336-8560. That's 617-336-8560. And we'll get those answered for you, hopefully. And a final disclaimer that I won't read like the Micro Machines man. Nicole and Shauna's opinions throughout this conversation are their personal thoughts and do not reflect those of their respective firms or clients. So don't take this as gospel legal advice for your business, and consult your own attorney before making any decisions. So with that out of the way.
Well said, Justin.
You guys are welcome. A quick plug for next week's show. In part one of our episode, we'll be joined by David and Carmen Favela, the co-owners of Border X Brewing in San Diego. They'll be here to discuss their new project, a collaboration with Mujeres Brew Club, the Mujeres Brew House in San Diego, which is focused on empowering women within the craft beer scene. In the second half of next week's conversation, we'll be joined by Dan Kopman, the CEO of Heavy Seas in Baltimore. He'll be here to discuss the current state of the industry and a whole lot more. There's plenty to discuss, as we all know. So let's go. Across the country in states like Michigan and in municipalities like Atlantic City, New Jersey, we've seen a temporary loosening of open container laws to encourage social distancing so people can still patronize these establishments while outdoors. Is there any historical evidence that this Main Street to Bourbon Street phenomenon might last longer than this pandemic? And I'll start with you, Jim.
Well, this idea of what would be called an entertainment district has been legislated over the past few years, besides just some of the cities like New Orleans and Savannah has a certain period of time when they have the open container. what they call to-go cups. So these have been around for a while, but more recently, Alabama and Nebraska and other states have created what they call authorization for cities to establish entertainment districts, where they can define an area to allow people to leave a venue with an alcoholic drink in their hands. So it's not a new phenomenon, but in each of the cases, there's also some uh, concerns that are raised relative to having people who are underage have access to alcohol in the public space, or if you allow them to move outside of the parameters of a dedicated outdoor seating area for the establishment, but go from venue to venue, then you have the questions about people bringing in a drink that they purchased someplace else into another venue. Or a lot of conditions are often applied where in order to consume alcohol, you have to use a designated cup. That cup is sometimes, like in Mobile, Alabama, used as a fundraiser, that they sell those cups, and then that helps to clean up the litter after the closing time. So this is not a new phenomenon, and you have to consider a number of variables or risk factors before you just leave it as an open-ended process.
Really interesting. Shauna, what have you been hearing from clients and other people out in the industry about this new phenomenon? Are people taking advantage of it, and what advice would you give them?
Absolutely. Most of them are lobbying for it, pushing hard through their local guilds to get these measures and keep these measures, and they're using the heck out of them. So, almost all of my clients right now have some sort of expanded outdoor seating. Their landlords have been really cooperative for the most part, which has been really great, and allowing them to use pretty much any available space to set up and socially distance the tables so that they can have expanded outdoor seating. And then similarly, they've been essentially lobbying for anything that's out there that they can get in this. So the big thing I think has been, what's that percentage capacity, right? So once you have the expanded space, which is an incredible help, how many tables can you safely put in? Do you go with a percentage of capacity, or do you go with a percentage, or do you go with how many tables you can fit in the space so long as they're socially distanced? And obviously, most of my clients seem to want to go with the let me fit as many as I possibly can, as long as I'm doing it safely strategy. And like I said, for the most part, that seems to have been working, and the legislatures have been really helpful in helping us implement it.
Great. Nicole, do you think we're going to see this spread?
Yeah, and I think you actually saw it spread a little bit even before COVID did, right? And we have examples across the country, like in Savannah or Las Vegas, right? And there's actually 7 states in total that don't have any open container laws at all in terms of, guidelines even on what that looks like on a local level. And one of the tough things about navigating this is it's not just different state to state, right? It's different locally. And it probably will look differently locally, just because what works in Las Vegas might not work in parts of New Jersey, right? So I think the tricky part about it is trying to get it right the first time, and trying to kind of think through a lot of the nuances. So as Jim brought up, some of the noise ordinances or, other concerns, I think that's going to be telling on how permanent these changes are, right? And how much this is going to spread. Because I think if the first few states like Michigan actually gets it right, and they think through all of these nuances, I think you're going to see a lot of states kind of look to Michigan as an example during COVID, right, on how to do it properly. And if they do it right and they set a good example, I think you'll see others follow suit.
Great. Jim, I know your organization has worked with cities all over the country to create really financially successful but very safe entertainment districts. So what do all of them have in common? What's a common thread that you see that really helps these areas thrive?
Well, I think it goes beyond just looking at the individual venues and how they operate, but how they all intersect with each other into an area. And then you have issues around crowd management, particularly when you had a common closing time. You also have issues around transportation. Again, with Uber and Lyft coming into areas, there was a lot more traffic congestion. And, at any point when people are all leaving and exiting at the same time, everybody is looking for that silver Honda Civic, and which one is mine? And if you're impaired by alcohol, then you can get into some problems. Then the policing approach, how do you police nightlife districts? How do you reduce assault and other types of crime that happens in and around nightlife districts? So these are all the variables that we look at. How well do you manage transportation? How well do you coordinate policing and security in venues? Increasingly, you had concerns about sexual harassment and assault in and around venues. These are the areas of training for security. And now you have security that has to be trained to systematically and diplomatically resolve conflicts over social distancing, because this is also going to be one of the responsibilities of security in venues, not only inside their venues, but increasingly when they're allowing outdoor activity or allowing people to have indoor activity. It's how do you manage the people queuing up outside your venue? So there's the responsibility that's now being placed on people to manage the people standing outside waiting to get in. So these are all the types of areas, but more significantly, as you have mixed use development, where you have residential being built in areas that have active nightlife districts, like one area that we worked with in Austin, Texas, which is the live music capital of the world, with a lot of historic venues, particularly on 6th Street. You have hotels and residential being built. And once people move in, they don't want that late night sound. So you have these conflicts between residents moving in and spending significant amounts of money because they want to have that social activity, but they tend to be older and they tend to socialize earlier. And then those late night younger people that go out that disturb the residents. So these are probably one of the biggest issues that we have faced. And I think for the short term, I don't think you're going to have places open till 2 o'clock in the morning with large occupancy venues emptying out all at the same time. Some cities we've worked in there, 20, 25, 30,000 people all coming out at the same time. So those are the types of challenges that you have to deal with.
That definitely probably isn't a challenge at the moment, given the current state of the world with COVID-19. And with COVID-19, we've seen so many different laws that have been loosened. So many craft brewers have added home delivery and curbside pickup sales, and they've been crediting these new avenues with keeping them afloat during this time. How likely are we to see some of these permissions stick, or are we going to see, I guess, them try to jam this genie back in the bottle? I'll go with you, Shauna.
Yeah, I mean, I wish them luck. This is one of those situations. I had a professor in law school who used to say, you can't get the ink out of the milk, right? Like once the ink's in the milk, the ink's in the milk. And it might get diluted, right? But the ink is in the milk. So, and to be clear, I'm being a little bit flip. There have definitely been some states where some of these gives have been kind of contingent on them going away as soon as we kind of get back to normal. But I mean, who knows when that is? And frankly, the longer that these go on, I think the longer the restrictions go on, the longer, the more set they'll be, and frankly, the more consumers will expect them. And so it becomes, I think, a little bit harder to take them away, especially when you're talking about things like DTC and, so direct to consumer from the brewery itself, but also delivery from retail. I mean, some states have that. Almost every state has DTC for wine, and it becomes really hard to explain to a legislator why wine can have it, but beer and even spirits can't. So I think it's, these are some things that small brewers have wanted for a while. And I make, the silver lining of the COVID-19 disaster, I think, is that, they might be able to get some of those things and they might be able to stay permanent. And we're even seeing that with some legislative changes in a couple of states now anyway, to make those changes permanent. So.
Nicole, what are you hearing from your clients as far, or I guess from craft breweries in general, on what's on their wish list when it comes to these loosened regulations?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think it varies a little bit from state to state, what's already legal, right? And what's already permissible in the state, and then what, breweries are hoping for. But I think, the thing to look at this is kind of from a broad perspective is how to diversify your business enough. So, if your business gets shut down or a portion of your business gets shut down, how are you diversified enough where you can still have a revenue stream, right? So I think breweries are really looking at ways to be creative, and, looking to local legislators to help them come up with ideas to make that happen. So, I think the to-go laws are really, like an interesting thing, because I agree with Sean. I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon. They require an investment from the brewery. And sometimes, new software systems or whatever to navigate that, right? And I think to ask breweries who are already down, especially small craft breweries who, depend on the on-premise, to kind of stop doing that after they made the initial investment, I think would be really difficult. So, I think it's tricky, and I think it varies depending on, how small the brewery is, how much of their business depends on the on-premise. If they can, if they have an off-premise presence at all, they've been doing okay. So, I think it depends.
If I could add to that, I personally, I think the notion of the craft beverage is that it's a social product. And the thing that's made the craft breweries successful is the consumer's ability to be in the space and to have interaction with the people who brew the product and to be with other people who are there to talk about the product. Now, when I grew up, we went to a bar and we had a Budweiser beer. We never really talked about the hops or the water or anything else that was in that Budweiser beer. But now the craft beer is really a mechanism for socializing. And I think for the sake of convenience, that people like the product, they'd want it delivered to their home. But I think maybe the consumer demand for that kind of home delivery, other than what you're talking about with direct shipping, may not necessarily be there because it's the social experience. It's like going to a farmer's market. You could get mostly the same fruits and vegetables in a good organic store, but nobody talks to each other at the produce counter at a grocery store. But when you go to the farmer's market, people are talking with each other. It's a social activity. So I think maybe even though the systems are set up, my question will be the consumer, will they still seek to have that home delivery when they're ordering their food, or do they want to engage in that educational and social experience?
That's a great point, Jim. I know one of the things that makes home delivery work right now is everyone's home. So, like you're home to be able to receive the delivery, you can show the driver your ID. And you also, you're there and like no one's going to work, so there's no traffic. In the beginning of the pandemic, we had JC and Esther from Trillium on, and they've run a really successful home delivery business in greater Massachusetts. But as Justin, I, and Nicole all know, Eastern Mass is plagued with horrific traffic most of the time. So you would never be able to run that anywhere close to efficiency when things go back to normal. So home delivery is great, but it's definitely a now thing and might not last throughout the duration. So
some of these e-commerce things that we've seen in recent weeks or in months, I guess the last 3 months, have been, like we just said, lifelines, because a lot of these craft breweries are selling beer directly to consumer through their four walls, and they don't have the distribution system set up or other avenues of revenue. So when that dried up, there went 90+% of their business. And so curbside pickup, delivery, as Jess pointed out there, and in some cases, direct to consumer shipping have become lifelines.
When I might add, if you think about it, we went from very little to everybody buying everything online. I think there's space for the pendulum to swing somewhere in the middle. And Jim raises a good point. My favorite part of drinking beer is drinking it with other people, right? Like, I don't particularly like to drink alone. I do it, but it's not my favorite. But for me, that's the initial purchase, right? So for me to try the beer, have the experience, have that kind of love of the brand, And then from there, then I'm lazy. And if I can just get it delivered to my house along with my paper towels and my kids' diapers and my food and everything else that I've been doing for the last 4 months and I've been really used to, then I'm gonna want to do that. I mean, I would like to do that. So I think having it available, but worrying that it's going to somehow dismantle the 3-tier system, I think Jim has a good point. Not everybody's going to do it, but knowing that it's another tool in the toolbox for the craft breweries, I think is key, and they really want it.
And that's something that we heard over and over, is this slippery slope argument, that the slope hasn't proven as slippery over the last 3 months. The 3-tier system hasn't collapsed. If you look at off-premise sales of beer, they've been skyrocketing. I mean, we're at 4 of the last 5 weeks of $1 billion each week of sales. And I guess when we're talking about middle ground and figuring out where that is, that's going to come down to the guilds of each state to begin those arguments. And I guess just last week, we saw the Brewers Association go through a round of job cuts, and included in those job cuts was Acacia Coast, the BA's National Guild Liaison. I've had a ton of side conversations with people involved in the guilds about how important she's been to working with them, and especially the smaller guilds. And so is this a major setback that we're seeing for craft brewers, the loss of this person? And how big will these guilds be in accomplishing these changes? And I guess I'll start with you, Shauna.
Sure. So, I mean, it's definitely a blow. She's been an incredible resource to the guilds that I work with. And I mean, she helped us through a couple of particularly tricky COVID-related legislative priorities that we had. So she will be sorely missed. I guess what we do, because it is what it is work at the guild, continue to work at the guild level, because most of the change happens at the state level, right? So, you know, the legislative initiatives and sort of the way to get those through is through the guilds, through the local guilds. And Acacia is an incredible resource, but at the end of the day, it is the guilds, and it's the strength of the guild. So, and the strength of the guild is the strength of the membership. So if you're, you know, sitting at home and you're panicking about Acacia, you know, I don't blame you. But at the same time, I think this is a great opportunity for you to get off your butt and get involved with your guild and tell them what you need and tell them what you want and tell them what it is that you're willing to do to help them get that done, right? Because the legislators don't get excited when the executive director of the guild and I walk in to tell them what we need, right? Like, I'm not cool, I'm not interesting. It's you guys as the brewers that are interesting and that have the stories and that can talk about your beer and your business and the jobs that you're creating and everything that you're doing to benefit your community and everything that COVID and these related shutdowns are doing to your business and therefore doing to the community. You know, I'm just a proxy. They like to hear it from y'all. The legislators like to hear it from y'all. So that's kind of my recommendation and my advice for, you know, how to try to get past this. But I mean, I do worry it's going to embolden the wholesalers. We look maybe like we're a little weakened. You know, they've already said they don't want an additional drop of beer to go through or to be sold outside of the 3-tier system. And here we are saying we want permanent DTC. So really, I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to work with the guilds to try to get your legislative priorities enacted.
Great. We just got a really great audience question, and reminder for everybody at home, if you have anything you want us to ask these guys, you can shoot a text to 617-336-8560. Audience question came in that dovetails with a question that Justin and I had already prepared. So clearly great minds think alike. But I definitely think it applies to all three of you. So Nicole, we'll start with you. But so a couple different things that have happened. In California a few weeks ago, the ABC called out third-party delivery platforms from not checking IDs thoroughly enough. And is this an example of why we can't have nice things? Do you think a few missteps during COVID with ID checking are going to ruin it for everybody in terms of reform? What do you think?
I hope not, because I think e-commerce is here to stay. I think, you know, the swing, like Shauna said, was so drastic, it'll give you whiplash, right? But I think it's one of those things where I think these things and these changes have to be really thoroughly thought through, right? So to kind of feed off of what Shauna was saying with the importance of working with your guilds and your local officials, there's nobody that understands your business better than you, right? And you have to be an advocate for it, because the legislators and even the guilds to some extent rely on that information, the boots on the ground, right? And to understand what you need to make it through this time, right? And to continue to be successful. So, you know, I think with California, you know, and some of the setbacks in terms of IDing, you know, that's a really tricky thing. And how do you, you know, check an ID with somebody with a face covering? And it's one of those things where guilds, local officials, your state authorities, they're figuring it out along with you. And we have to be creative here. And there's going to be some element of trial and error, but I think it's really important to kind of think these things thoroughly through and make sure you're approaching it in the right way, so you're setting a good precedent.
Great. I mean, Jim, have you been hearing from anybody in your world about how difficult it is to check IDs when everybody's masked up?
Not yet, but I'm sure that will become a key factor. More venues are beginning to use ID scanners, and that's one way of documenting a person coming in. In fact, there's one ID scanning company that's also developed an app that can be used for contact tracing, so that you can notify people if they were in a specific venue on a day. They'll be able to be notified that there was positive testing while you were there. But clearly that it seems to me what you're talking about is the home delivery and the checking ID for home delivery, which is often done by a third party like a UPS or a FedEx or whatever. So now they don't face the same legal responsibilities, you know, as the people who are selling the product. So I think that's where you have to begin to work with the delivery systems to become more aware of how to better improve their age identification procedures. But you know, my experience with those delivery people, they're there to deliver as much as they can, as quickly as they can, and they don't necessarily take the time to follow through on what might be the right procedures, or maybe they've never been properly trained. You know, when you work with people in social venues where they're you know, young and they're inexperienced and they're told that they have to check ID, it's not just a matter of telling them they have to check ID. You have to go through a process of how they check IDs. And that may be something that might be necessary for the third-party delivery systems that has to be updated in terms of procedures, or the liability for them if they fail to do it properly, in the same way that the bar that doesn't check ID is going to be cited.
Great point. Shauna, what do you think about all of this? Is there, who legally, who is the onus on to check IDs in a third-party platform delivery purchase?
Yes, so it's kind of twofold. Great segue, because that was my comment, is, you know, ultimately the responsibility is the licensee, right? So the manufacturer or the retailer, if they're doing the delivery of the beer. You can kind of contract around that and say, if I get in trouble, you're going to indemnify me because you need to be better. And that gives sort of financial incentive for them to train their people to do it right. But ultimately, you know, the state agencies don't care. I mean, I was on the phone with one trying to figure out, there was a really unclear order that was issued in one of the states. And so I called the commissioner there to get a little bit of clarity. And his response was, just don't use a fly-by-night. Like, yes, you can go ahead and you can do the delivery yourselves. You can do a third party if you prefer to work with a third party. But ultimately, don't use somebody fly-by-night. Use somebody that's trustworthy, because we are going to be checking. And if you get in trouble, yep, great, you have a contract claim, but ultimately it's going to go against your license, and it's potentially your license that would be suspended. So, you know, obviously this is something that my clients want, and I want them to have it, but there's responsibility that goes with it to make sure that you're working with a reputable company that is checking IDs, that takes compliance seriously. And, you know, to Jim's point, I know that there are a lot of deliveries that are trying to be made, but you know, all you need is one underage person to go on social media or angry parent to bust you, and it just dismantles the whole system, and then we can't have nice things. So.
Definitely. So along the same lines, Nicole, in both of our past lives, when I was a beer marketer and you were an in-house attorney at a beer company, and I would bring you all my crazy harebrained ideas, and you would have to tell me, Jess, you can't give something of value to an account. We're seeing this whole new channel, e-commerce. It's brand new. It's kind of like the Wild West, and it's making things a little blurry because you have some platforms like Drizzly that are not the retailer, but some that are doing online delivery, like say Total Wine, they are the retailer. So how can breweries tout their products being on these platforms without running afoul of any of those something of value regulations?
Yeah, I think that's the tricky part. And, I think it kind of goes back to, a lot of the laws, state laws were written right after Prohibition, right? So they're antiquated and they're just not up to speed with what the beer market looks like currently, right? And they certainly don't, when they were written, didn't contemplate e-commerce or social media, right? Or all of that, how that kind of ties into it. But there's a few things you can do, right? I mean, my biggest advice is you always act reasonable. If it doesn't feel right and it feels like you're giving something kind of a quid pro quo kind of this situation, probably don't do it. And check and again, work with your local authorities, work with your guilds, right? To get, some of these laws updated so you have clear guidelines on what you can and can't do. That's kind of the underlying theme of all of this, right? And this is, COVID related and not COVID related. This is a really good time to, just take a fresh look at some of these laws, make sure that they're providing clear guidelines. And if not, it's kind of a good catalyst to bring about some change, right? So.
If I could add something, I mean, I'm not totally familiar with the guild, but I assume it's some kind of an association of people that work together. And I think this is true in so many different segments of the industry, and it's so segmented that you have everybody working in many ways along the same lines for the same purposes, but they tend to be isolated and work in silos of each other. And I think part of that is because, in my opinion, it's a question of the product that you're selling a product. Now, if you're selling the product for on-premise consumption, people are not necessarily buying your product per se. What they're doing is they're buying the space in which to consume the product because they want to be with other people and they want to socialize. So I think that the more of all of the different sectors of the industry can begin to think of themselves not as a bar or a nightclub or a brew pub or a tap room or whatever it is, that they're really social venues. They're places where people gather to socialize, to eat, drink, listen to music, and dance. And as long as you create that common denominator, there may be more in common among all the different sectors of the industry than there are differences. Clearly, the craft breweries faced a lot of obstacles in terms of the 3-tier system and the way they're working with on-premise businesses and, how tasting rooms all of a sudden become social gathering places, and you bring in food and you bring in entertainment. Now, all of a sudden you're licensed to be a craft brewery, but you become like a pub or a tavern. And then the pubs and taverns that are licensed say, you're competing with me, and that's not what you're supposed to be. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard that. And so the question then becomes, how do you work together? Because if you're in an area where you're dependent upon groups of people coming into the area and going from your place to another place to another place throughout the evening, that's to me what defines what I would call urban hospitality versus suburban hospitality. So suburban hospitality, you get in your car, you drive to the mall, you go to the TGI Fridays, you meet your friends, you get in your car and you leave. Urban or downtown district hospitality is where you start in one place and you go through the evening going to different places. So there's an opportunity to build yourself as a community of social venues than just segmenting yourself. And I think that's the long term, the way all these industry sectors are going to succeed, is to not isolate themselves because of the little niche that they're in, but really find the commonality amongst them all.
That's an interesting point, because as we work through this pandemic, we've seen different businesses treated in different ways. Breweries not treated as the same as restaurants, bars not treated the same as breweries or restaurants. And so I guess how do we get to that common denominator theme here? Because that it seems like there's a hurdle in convincing legislators that, and a bit of morality being sort of thrust upon this as well. Because if you look at some of the regulations in California, for example, brewers are required to sell food with the drink, and that's just during this pandemic, obviously. So I guess, Shauna, if we're trying to get to the point where everybody's getting treated a little bit equally in the hospitality industry, what's it going to take?
If I could solve that question.
Yeah, just an easy one for you there. I'm sorry.
Let's see what I can do. It's so hard, right? And it's so state specific, because it's what's currently permitted in the state. Nicole alluded to this, right? What's currently allowed in the state, what's currently not allowed in the state. What do the breweries look like in that state? Are they all small? Are they all big? Is there a smattering, across the spectrum? So they all have, like, it's hard enough to get the brewers on the same page about what they want to ask for through a state guild, but then to also get the retailers to agree with it, and then get the wholesalers to agree with it. And then you also usually have labor, the Teamsters, that also need to get on board, and kind of working through that whole coalition. And then in the background, there's an angry, temperance group that doesn't like the thing that you're trying to do. And you just put it all together and somehow you make sausage, right? But so I don't have a great answer, other than, the temptation, I think, is there. Well, we should support each other, right? I mean, that's the easy answer, is we should support each other. We should understand each other. We should have meetings. We should get to know each other. All those things. Our guilds should meet with their, their legislative organizations. But I was just going to touch on, the temptation is there right now to really support the local restaurants that are being hammered too, right? It's not just the brewers, it's all of on-premise that's getting hammered right now. But it's, doing that in a compliant way is going to be that much more important for us to get the things that we want, because as soon as we look bad or that we're doing something wrong, it just becomes that much more difficult to come to the table and have clean hands, right? And look like you can engage in that conversation. So I've been getting asked a lot about, can I donate directly to bartenders? Can I donate directly to the bar? Can I just give them beer? Can I just, do these sorts of things? And their hearts are in the right places. And, maybe some of them selfishly want to build some of those coalitions that Jim's talking about. Like, this is a great opportunity for us to get along. And I agree with them. But it's also a great opportunity to get busted by the ABC and set the whole industry back, because we looked like the second we had an excuse, we just let the floodgates open and engaged in behavior that is still illegal, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic. So that's my non-answer to that extremely difficult question. And hopefully the viewers got something out of it, which is, be nice and follow the rules.
I think Nicole brought up a good point before, and that is that most of the states and most of the businesses are operating under regulations that were written in 1933, 1934. And there's a great quote at the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. that basically says that as society changes, institutions have to change to keep pace with society. So when we think about life in 1933, we didn't have a 24/7 economy. We didn't have technology the way we have it now, but we're trying to govern social behavior and activity based upon standards that existed in 1933. And some states have tried to update their laws, but somebody once said it's like, driving a Model T Ford that's been repaired and fixed with parts that don't necessarily fit with the original product. And I think that's where the problems are. It's we're trying to figure out ways to function. It's like, what if we did this meeting using fax machines, right? I mean,
nobody's tuning in, Jim, if we're doing this with fax machines.
I can't believe fax machines still exist.
Right. See,
we're lucky we don't have AOL discs right now.
There you go. You see, so society has kept pace in so many different ways with innovation and technology, but alcohol laws are still governed by a culture of the 1930s, after you had, a decade or more of prohibition and crazy behavior, So I think that we have to get everybody organized together to say, let's not try to fix each little part. Let's look at this from a more holistic perspective. And that's how can we modernize our society and not have the alcohol regulators define us in trying to fit into a world that no longer exists.
Excellent point. We did just get a really great audience question, and friendly reminder, everybody at home, if you want us to ask a question to the panel, shoot a text to 617-336-8560. Question came in from California. Can we please elaborate a little bit more on the future of DTC in California specifically? Because I believe brewers just got the ability to ship within the state, and I think New York did that too. But Nicole, I know winemakers in California have a lot more freedoms here than brewers do. So what do you think we can expect for brewers moving forward?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And I'm glad our California listener asked that question, because so kind of going back to DTC, this is a great opportunity, I think, to give a lot of the craft brewers and small brewers who it doesn't make sense to distribute right now to a chance to kind of get their product out there to more people. And I think, specifically to California, I think that's going to be a continued trend. And I think you saw that a little bit even before COVID, right? And with the 2019 Supreme Court case that kind of loosened things a little bit, right, in Kentucky. And I think we have a really good example to look to, right? The wineries, there's 43 states right now that allow direct-to-consumer shipping for wine. There's only 7 for beer, right? And there's some fundamentals, right, that you still have to work out, the economics behind it, how costly it is to ship beer, which tends to be a cheaper product than wine. And also just logistically, craft breweries are everywhere. Wine is kind of a centralized location. So there's definitely, I'm not trying to equate the two industries, but I think the wine guys did a really good job of grouping together and fighting for a few years pretty hard to get to where they are. And I think the beer guys can kind of take a page out of the wine guys' book, right? And look at this as an opportunity. And maybe, it's not as large of a portion of their business as it is for the wine industry, but it's another way to diversify. And it's another way to, not to undercut the wholesalers, but it's just another tool to expand your consumer base and get your product out there and maybe test market a few markets to see if, it's viable to bring your product in with a distributor in New York and build a base first. So it's, it's more economical for both the wholesaler and the brewer. So I think it could be used as a tool for a lot of brewers. And I think, kind of the timing is now. And I think you're going to see a fundamental shift. And a lot of states look at what's being done recently because of COVID, and seeing if this is an opportunity to, do direct to consumer for beer and distilled spirits, right? And kind of bring that up to where wine is today.
So now is the time to do that?
Now is the time.
Shauna, would you agree?
Yeah, no, I do agree. And I would add to the California thing without getting too far into the legal weeds. Nicole and I were chatting about this the other day, that it's also really interesting. So California, Virginia, there are a couple other states have allowed direct to consumer for in-state only. So in-state licensees only. And there's been a number of Supreme Court cases, including one recently, that says you can't really do that, right? That's unconstitutional interstate commerce. I'm not going to bore the heck out of everybody on it, but that essentially you have a strong argument that that's not constitutional, and should it be challenged, that you would be able to ship in and out of California beer, and you would be able to ship in and out of Virginia spirits. So I'm really curious to see how that plays out. I think that that's an interesting place for the advocacy groups to get involved and maybe challenge that, to kind of open that up. So, we're pushing legislatively at the guild side because now's the time, but we're also pushing, and most great advocacy groups work this way. They work legislatively, they also work judicially, to challenge anything that's unconstitutional or inconsistent constitutionally. So I'll be really interested to kind of see how that plays. And then my other thought was just, there are a lot of breweries that were taproom only model. There are a lot of breweries that were taproom only model in March that suddenly are trying to figure out how the heck to keep their doors open with curbside sales and DTC. And they're now coming to me and talking about whether or not it makes sense for them to go into full distribution, or whether I think that there would be a DTC model that they could follow into the future that's maybe not as large as we've talked about, but is something so that they're diversified. And if they're talking to me about it, I'm helping them from a legal and compliance standpoint, but I'm also directing them back to their state legislators to get those conversations going, because I don't think anybody wants to be hung out to dry like this again.
Definitely not. On the topic of California, wholesaler consolidation is going on there like crazy. We've seen the Reyes Beer division make its 11th acquisition in the past 2 years. So what kind of recourse do smaller brewers have when their wholesalers are bought like this? Nicole, what would you say?
So to give a non-answer, it will depend on your state, and it really depends. You need a strong distribution agreement, right? And the more you can figure out, at the beginning of a relationship between a brewer and a wholesaler, the better, right? And it sets you off on a good foot. Wholesalers are brewers' biggest partners, right? And their most important customer. And, to have those conversations, and if you're in a tough franchise law state, upfront about what the contingency plan is. What does this look like if we have to have the conversation one day that we want to terminate or walk away, or you want to sell our brands or trade our brands? I think are all really good conversations to have kind of on the onset. But, if I could give some advice, know what your state franchise law is, right? Because it is drastically different from state to state. And know and have a really good contract to protect yourself as much as you can for situations where, wholesalers are consolidating, or there's a change of ownership, or, even wholesalers are trading some territories could, give you some choices, right? And it gives you leverage, and having an agreement that protects yourself is crucial.
So are breweries who aren't getting the wholesaler support they need during the pandemic able to break these contracts? And should they explore this? Shauna, what would you say?
Yeah, it's really hard. So yes and no, right? So there are some states that have franchise law reform or you have a really strong contract. And so you could get out for any reason whatsoever if you just pay your fair market value multiple, right? So then the issue becomes, what's the fair market value multiple? And that varies from state to state, right? It might be 25,000 barrels brewed. It might be 300,000 barrels brewed. It depends. But even if you don't have a strong contract, you potentially have a craft brewer exception under your state franchise law. So get out. And yes, they have been coming to me to ask. Where it gets tough is if your state has a strong franchise law. So if your state has a strong franchise law and you don't have a strong contract, and most contracts didn't say pandemic, until 3 months ago. So, if you don't have that, it's going to be really, really hard to prove that in the last 3 months that they didn't act with good faith. And it's going to be really hard to show good cause, right? Because everything's upside down. Everything went to shit, right? Like all upside down. Some of the, I've been working on some rehabilitations with some of my clients prior to COVID, and we basically just had to hit pause. One of them in particular had a couple of COVID-related deaths, right? Like you can't exactly go to them and say, why are you not meeting your distribution goals? And why are you not making your marketing commitments? And why did you not do that, event that you were supposed to do in the middle of COVID? So it becomes really difficult, which is why, getting back to Nicole's point, having that strong distribution agreement at the beginning is so important, so that you have the ability in moments of transition, change of ownership, craziness like this, or just frankly, you feel like they're disinterested and you want to do something different, that you can get out. But the Reyes thing, change of ownership is the best time to try to get out of an agreement, even if you don't have a strong one, because at that point, they're already no longer emotionally invested in your brands and they just want the money, typically. So you can say, I don't want the one you picked, I want that one instead. Can we do that, please? So I don't want to discourage anybody if you don't have a strong distribution agreement from not looking at your options, because there's always something that you can do to improve the relationship with your wholesaler.
So, I mean, contracts almost always include what's called a force majeure clause. I don't know if I said that right, but it gives both parties the ability to get out of responsibilities in the face of unforeseen incidents like fire or like major labor strikes. They likely, however, have not covered global pandemics, as you just said, Shauna. So, what advice would you guys offer brewers entering contracts right now that we've all seen what a major public health crisis can do? How should contracts be worded in a post-COVID world? Is that it?
Let's say Nicole looks like she froze, so I'll tackle and let her hop in. So hindsight's 2020, right?
Back, sorry.
That's okay.
It froze.
No, I was just gonna say that, you know, hindsight's 2020. So putting the language in and cleaning it up, like your lawyers can do that, you know, look for it. Does it say pandemic and the force majeure clause, right? Does it cover the things that you think could really happen? It's funny that this has become such a major clause when it's something that usually you glance over and you just make sure it's not nuts. I always say that they can't get out and claim force majeure for sneezing. But now, like, you really want to scrutinize it and look at it and make sure it's good. I think the most important thing, though, for post-COVID, and even if you're still trying to figure out what the heck to deal with the ones that you're sort of feeling stuck in, is have a conversation. And Nicole, I know you and I spent all spring working on this, but like have a conversation and think about all the ways that it could go wrong and how you're going to handle it. And then, you know, most of that can be handled with the business commercials of the agreement instead of needing to be handled by the legalities, right? So figure out all the commercials, and then the lawyers can go in and kind of clean it up and zhuzh it up and make sure that you're also legally protected. But Nicole, I'm sure you have goodness to add there. Jimmy, you're unfrozen.
Yeah, it's technology, right? But I think, you know, I think Shauna really covered it pretty well. But the one addition I would have is, you know, force majeure is a big word for kind of a simple a simple concept. It all really boils down to having a contingency plan, right? And thinking through kind of worst case scenario. And I think this could kind of be applied, of course, from a contract perspective, and make sure that, you know, your contracts are protecting you in a worst case scenario, doomsday kind of situation. But also, you know, to kind of look at your business model and just make sure that you're diversifying and you don't have, you know, a single source supplier for something, right? Because if something happens where that supplier can't source you cans, for example, and all of your product goes into cans, you know, you better have a backup or you're not selling anything. So I think it's kind of it's kind of one of those moments where you can evaluate your business, both from a contractual perspective, of course, but almost just on a basic level to make sure that you're diversified enough, right? And all of your vendors and, you know, coming down to even your janitorial services and things like that, that you just are thinking through kind of contingency plans and backup plans and option Bs, because I think that's really important. And if this has taught us anything, we know the importance of that, right?
One last reminder, we are on the final countdown here. I will not sing Europe, but if you have a question, text us at 617-336-8560. That's 617-336-8560. Jim, this week, ahead of the 4th of July holiday, which we all know is one of the most major beer selling holidays of the year and weeks, we've seen several states and counties pull back on their reopenings, even outright order bars to close, whether it be Texas, Florida, Arizona, Colorado, 19 counties now in California. What are the implications here? And, you know, what do maybe the leaders of these counties and these states need to know that, you know, that they're maybe not realizing when they do sort of a sweeping closure like this?
Well, I take a walk in the redwoods. I live here in California, and there's a quote that I like: "That which grows quickly withers and dies; that which grows slowly endures." So in my opinion, I think what happened was there was this push to have this reopening without having a real clear plan locally or any kind of oversight to monitor the practices of the venues and of the patrons themselves. And so those businesses that made the as best effort as they could to try to create a safe environment were then overshadowed by those that really took advantage of the situation and really weren't in compliance or doing the right thing. And as natural, government always comes in and punishes those that are doing good because of the behaviors of a minority that were doing bad. So I think this is a time to take a step back and say, how can we more systematically plan and coordinate the best education and training of the venues to have the interagency teams? Because now you have fire, you have police, you have health, you have alcohol regulatory. Some places it's one agency that's enforcing, another it's another jurisdiction, it's another. So there's no clarity, there's no clear definition of who do I go to get help, who do I get the guidance from. And that's where I think things happened. And unless that time is taken to invest to a more longer lasting solution, you're just going to have these fits and starts, and people are going to be blaming everybody else for what's going on. And that's unfortunate, because I've seen businesses and I've worked with businesses that have made the investment to do the right thing, and then they're closed. And all those employees that have been out of work for 3 months coming back thinking they had a job, now are out of a job again. We're not recognizing that poor planning is really what happened. And I think the long-term ability to reconstruct what you had before is going to be even more difficult because of these fits and starts.
Definitely. How do these fits and starts potentially negatively impact businesses' ability to receive PPP forgiveness, Shauna? I know a lot of your clients have gotten it.
Yeah, a lot of them have. Yeah, so it's a little unclear right now. So technically you're supposed to bring all of your people back, right? But if you keep having to close, they're going to have to move it back. I mean, and they will, right? That the PPP forgiveness deadline will likely have to be extended out again. It already has been once. If we keep doing this again, I'm sure it will be again. The biggest thing is, frankly, just logistically, it's been so hard for my clients to get people to want to come back, because some of them are truly afraid of getting COVID, right? Some of them have no childcare. Some of them are really enjoying the extra $600 and are stupid enough to say that when they're called and asked to be brought back. So, it's a complicated issue. I think everybody's really trying to do their best, but they're working on this much information and running fast, and so mistakes are going to be made. So again, I just keep saying, the two themes are, this is why we can't have nice things, and work with your damn guilds. Work with your damn guilds so that they know what the issues are. And oh my gosh, please be a responsible actor and make your employees wear their masks and follow the appropriate safety protocol, even if you think that this is all BS. Like, please do that, because otherwise this is why we can't have nice things, and they will shut us back down again. So please, for the love of the whole, do that.
Nicole, what are you hearing about PPP forgiveness and these fits and starts?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it'll be extended, right? I don't think anybody's going to, hold a hard line on that. And I think just, PPP is a really important element of it, but then you have the operational burdens, right? The just practicality of shutting down, opening back up, doing everything, including, purchasing food and all of perishable goods, right? That when you shut down a week later, makes it really, the economic impact of shutting down twice as bad, right? And you're actually seeing that in some, cities and some states. Restaurants, even with the ability to open up, aren't doing that, right? They're taking a beat, they're seeing how things go, and then they're it's more of a slow roll open. And I think that's probably a good bet for a lot of breweries, but I think it depends on your business, right? On how to approach it, because there's not a one size fits all solution to this. I think some breweries, it makes a lot of sense to wait and see how things pan out before you make the investment to open your doors again. But I also think, if you can do certain things and make investments that are smart investments, that maybe, and work with your local authorities and your guilds to, make sure some of these changes are more permanent, the initial investment makes a lot more sense in the long run, right? So if you're adding outdoor seating, ensuring that that will stay and will be able to stay open even in the event of a further closure, I think is crucial and something that you should be thinking about, right, when you're looking to open your doors again.
Definitely. Okay,
If I could say one quick point, I think the other thing too is, again, getting back to this district philosophy, this district model, because ultimately property owners that lease to all of the different venues are going to be confronted with the risk of these businesses not opening. And it may be just the burden of the rent that they have to pay. And I think collectively there might be a way to work with property owners in general in a district to get them to recognize that as a group, they have to support all of the independent businesses to help them succeed. And again, while you're working to change the regulations as a group, I think sooner or later you're going to have to work with property owners to get them to recognize that if all of these businesses fail because the rents are too high, nobody's going to succeed. And I think that's the other partner that you're going to have to bring into the fold.
Absolutely. What a great point, Jim. It's going to be really interesting to see where we are like a year from now. So we're at the top of the hour, but I did not want us to wrap this up without doing the legal lightning round. So alcohol laws, notoriously Byzantine. Sean and Nicole, and then we're going to have another question for the whole group. But Sean and Nicole, I want you guys to fire off your favorite alcohol legal oddity. Shauna, you go first.
Oh, don't make me go first.
All right, fine. Nicole, go first.
Nicole, go first.
Okay. I'm going to bring you one from the great state of New Jersey that if you get a DUI in the state of New Jersey, you are no longer able to get a personalized license plate.
Wild. Shauna, what you got?
All right, so I've got the fabulous one that I enjoy, which is if you were in your car and you were driving from Philadelphia, you are not allowed to drink in your car until you cross the Delaware line. When you cross the Delaware line, everybody can drink in the car. And I had a state trooper look me in the eye and tell me this. Then as you drive down on into Maryland, so you're driving down the Delmarva Peninsula, you get into Maryland, the driver has to stop drinking. And then finally, when you get to Virginia, hopefully you finished your 6-pack because it's time to put it all away.
My personal favorite is that in California, any item you have made to enhance a beer display cannot have any useful purpose. So a 3-foot hand-painted stein, great. A basketball hoop, no, you got to weld a bar across it. So,
That's when I've had a lot of fun with that one.
Oh, we've had a lot of fun with that one. Nicole, you got another one?
There's actually, I'll do a twofer. There are two that I know of. Laws on the books in Alaska and in Ohio where it is illegal to give beer specifically to a moose in Alaska and illegal to give a beer to a fish in Ohio.
A fish.
It's so weird. Why I know this also, I have no idea.
And we told people that we weren't giving them legal advice that they could use. So they can take away that they can't give beer to a moose or a fish. This is why people tune into Frontlines.
Exactly.
All the hard-hitting beer industry knowledge you need. Shauna, do you have one more law?
Oh, God. I enjoy that you can, oh, God. That's a hard one more law. No. I feel very put on the spot and right now.
In New Hampshire, letters on beer signs cannot be taller than 12 inches.
Only outside. Inside, you're fine. Outside.
Oh.
Clarification.
That's why you're here.
Because I was going to go with the Virginia, like you can only give a cardboard sign that's less than, I think it's $40, which.
$39.
Who the heck wants a cardboard sign on a display?
It has to be able to be broken over your knee. Yeah. The weird stuff you learn when you make beer POS. Justin, I know you got one more for everybody. Let's land this plane.
Yes, this is our final question. This will dovetail with the legal lightning round. Magic wand question. You can change one Bev Alc regulatory law. What is it? We'll go with Shauna first.
Bev Alc regulatory? So Are we talking trade practice or are we talking franchise? World is my oyster?
Dealer's choice.
Oof. I could change one. I would go with straight franchise reform. I'd just wave my magic wand and somehow figure out how to make that a federal thing. I'm not an a-hole. I would make it reasonable, right? Fair market value can be paid. but you learn in the first year of law school that you should always be allowed to efficiently breach a contract. But I somehow live in a world where you cannot efficiently breach contracts, and it's annoying.
Jim, is there one Bev Alc regulatory law that you would change?
Well, I think just changing a common closing time would make a whole lot of difference in terms of impacts on residential quality of life, impacts on getting people home safely because you're not putting everybody all out at the same time so they can't get the rides home. You're going to eliminate a lot of the fights and disturbances that happen, a lot of the vandalism, the public urination issues. All of these things happen because we say at 2 o'clock in the morning, everybody has to leave at the same time. And then there's often not enough transportation systems, there's not enough sidewalk space, there's not enough lighting, there's all kinds of other issues. So I think we should recognize that 2 o'clock in the morning for some people is late, but for some people it's just the beginning of the night.
Nicole, Matt, wave your magic wand. What would you do?
So Shauna truthfully stole mine because I would absolutely say franchise reform, and specifically probably a small, craft carve out. But then it might put Shauna and I out of a job. So I thought twice about that. And maybe, generally updating, some of the 1933 laws put into place and just modernizing it, right? Modernizing the entire industry. So back to a point that Jim had brought up earlier, right? Like taking a hard look at, everything across the board and everything that was, written almost 100 years ago, not quite, but, and, applying that to how the actual industry works today. Makes sense.
That's the way to end it. Everyone, thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in here to our viewers out there. Happy 4th of July. Celebrate responsibly out there. Wear a mask. Be safe. Just take us home and we'll get out of here.
Absolutely. So join us next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Our guests are going to be David and Carmen Favela, the owners of Border X Brewing in San Diego. They're going to talk to us about their new project with the Mujeres Brew Club, which is a monthly beer club for women. They're opening a co-branded or a co-activated tap room in San Diego, the Mujeres Brew House, which is supposed to be a really welcoming spot for women to come and enjoy, discuss, and learn about craft beer. Second half of the hour, our guest is Dan Kopman, the CEO of Heavy Seas Brewing in Baltimore, to discuss the current state of the industry. I am going to head up to the beach. I'm here at the Jersey Shore and feed a beer to a fish because it's not illegal. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next week.